The darkness was a living Intitia, suffocating shroud that clung to every corner of the bedroom. The feeble light struggled through boarded-up windows as Alex lay rigid on the edge of his bed, his chest heaving with shallow, panicked breaths. A guttural groan, as if the house itself was dying, emanated from deep within the walls. Soon, a grating sound, a rasp of bone against stone, echoed from beneath the floorboards, each scrape marking a morbid countdown toward unseen horrors. Alex bolted upright, his trembling hands barely managing to clutch the threadbare blanket. Shadows around him were no longer mere absences of light. They writhed and pulsed as if alive, morphing into fleeting, grotesque shapes that threatened his sanity. A cold sweat clung to his skin as he forced himself to move. With bare feet on the icy wooden floor, he edged toward the wall from which the scraping had grown louder. Pressing his ear against the cracked plaster, he realized the noise was not confined to one place. It filled the room from above, below, and behind him. Then, the wall shuddered violently. Plaster splintered outward, revealing not empty space, but a void harboring a dense, pulsating mass. A black tendril, glistening with a dark, oily sheen, snaked out, leaving trails of icy, viscous slime on his fingers. Alex stumbled backward, tripping over furniture as his heart pounded in terror. For a moment, an eerie silence reigned, punctuated only by his ragged breathing, until a distorted, low whisper slithered into his ear. "You shouldn't have come here." Without waiting for a reply, the room revealed another horror. A small wooden figurine rested on the nightstand. Its jagged smile and hollow eyes seemed to mock him. As Alex stared, the figurine trembled violently. With a sudden crack, its mouth split open to reveal rows of razor-sharp teeth. In an instant, it leaped off the table and melted into the darkness. Alex's cry was swallowed by the oppressive silence as the ceiling creaked ominously. Upstairs, heavy, deliberate footsteps trailed toward the staircase, a chilling portent of what was to come. Outside, the night was eerily silent, the stillness pressing down on the neighborhood like a suffocating weight. Alex sat in the living room, the flickering glow of the television casting grotesque shadows across the walls. His gaze drifted toward the window, where the neighbor stood motionless in his yard. The man's silhouette was dark and ominous against the pale moonlight, his posture predatory, his gaze fixed on Alex's house. A chill ran down Alex's spine, a primal fear gnawing at his sanity. He blinked, and the neighbor was gone, vanished into the shadows as if he had never been there. Alex's breath quickened, his mind racing to rationalize what he had seen. But moments later, a shadow moved along the side of the neighbor's house. It wasn't a normal shadow. It slithered with unnatural speed and purpose, a chilling testament to something lurking just beyond the veil of perception. "It's nothing," Alex whispered to himself, his voice hollow and unconvincing. "Just a trick of the light." But deep down, he knew better. The feeling of being watched was overwhelming, a suffocating presence that clung to him like a second skin. He tried to sleep, but the silence of the house was alive, amplifying every creak and rustle into a symphony of dread. His mind replayed the image of the shadow, its predatory movements etched into his memory. Then, the tapping began. Tap, tap, tap. The sound was faint at first, a hollow echo resonating deep within the house. Alex froze, his breath catching in his throat. The tapping grew louder, more insistent, emanating from the living room. Clutching his phone in trembling hands, he crept toward the source of the noise. The living room was empty. The curtains swayed slightly, though there was no breeze. Alex hesitated, his heart pounding as he reached for the edge of the curtain. With a sharp tug, he pulled it back. Nothing. The emptiness was more terrifying than any phantom he could have imagined. It was as if the house itself was mocking him, feeding on his fear. Days later, Alex saw the neighbor again. This time, the man stood in his window, framed by the sickly yellow glow of an interior light. His head was tilted slightly, his posture unnervingly still, like a predator studying its prey. Alex's car felt like a glass cage, every movement visible, every breath audible under the neighbor's unrelenting gaze. The man's stare was a physical weight, cold and predatory, piercing through the glass and into Alex's soul. "It's nothing," Alex muttered, his voice trembling. But the neighbor's figure remained unmoving, a dark, ominous presence in the fading light. When Alex finally forced himself out of the car, the cool evening air did little to calm his nerves. The hum of the neighborhood, once a comforting backdrop, was gone, replaced by an oppressive silence. As he walked toward his front door, he felt the neighbor's eyes on him, a prickling sensation on the back of his neck. Each step felt heavier, slower, as if the distance had stretched into an eternity. When he reached the door, the curtains in the neighbor's window were closed. Relief washed over Alex, but it was fleeting. Why had the man hidden? Had he seen Alex looking? Was he concealing something unspeakable? The house felt like a hunting ground. Every shadow, a potential hiding place. Every creak, a potential footstep. Alex turned on every light, desperate to banish the darkness, but the feeling of being watched lingered. It was suffocating, a constant, gnawing dread that eroded his sanity. Midnight arrived, and the darkness was a thick, suffocating blanket pressing down on Alex, a chilling premonition of unseen horror. His dreams were filled with shadows and whispers, with the feeling of unseen eyes boring into his soul. He woke several times during the night, each time with a jolt, his heart pounding against his ribs. Lying there in the darkness, he listened to the silence, trying to convince himself it was just a dream, just a trick of the light. But the feeling of unease lingered, a chilling certainty that something was wrong, that he was no longer alone, that he was being watched, hunted, by a presence unseen. The first rays of sunlight, cold and unnatural, seeped through the curtains, casting long, distorted shadows that writhed across the bedroom floor. Alex forced himself out of bed, the house heavy with a silence that felt less like peace and more like a suffocating shroud. He walked to the window, his breath catching in his throat, and pulled back the curtain, his fingers trembling. The neighbor's house stood in stark contrast to the morning's false serenity. The curtains were drawn tightly shut, like eyelids concealing dark, malevolent secrets. Even as the sun bathed the neighborhood in its deceptive glow, Alex couldn't shake the feeling that he was still being watched, that something was watching him. The morning light, once a symbol of hope, now felt like a spotlight, exposing his vulnerability. The neighbor's house, a silent sentinel, stood motionless, its secrets locked within its walls. "Look away," Alex whispered, his voice a mere tremor against the oppressive silence. But his eyes were locked on the house, drawn by a morbid curiosity. The house didn't look abandoned, but it didn't look lived in either. The windows were pristine, unnaturally so, like polished obsidian reflecting nothing, hiding everything. The lawn was meticulously manicured, yet devoid of life, a sterile, unsettling tableau. There was no sound, no movement, no trace of human presence, just an oppressive stillness that felt like a tomb. And yet, it felt alive. A dark, unseen energy pulsed from within its walls, a malevolent life force that seeped into the very air around it. The air itself felt thick, viscous, like a suffocating shroud, pressing against his skin, whispering unseen threats. The shadows cast by the morning sun stretched unnaturally long, reaching out like tendrils of darkness, grasping for him. The feeling of being watched intensified, no longer a mere sensation, but a cold, unwavering certainty. It wasn't just a feeling, it was a physical weight, a chilling presence that bored into his soul, dissecting his fear. Alex scanned the windows, searching for any sign of life, but they were dark and lifeless, reflecting only his own terrified gaze. His heart pounded against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the suffocating silence, threatening to shatter the fragile illusion of normalcy. And then he saw it. A flicker of movement, subtle, almost imperceptible, yet undeniable. The curtain in the living room shifted, just slightly, as if brushed by an unseen hand, a chilling confirmation of the unseen eyes that were watching, waiting. The movement wasn't random, it was deliberate, a silent, terrifying message. Alex froze, his breath hitching in his throat, a strangled gasp against the suffocating silence. His eyes, wide with terror, locked onto the window, his mind racing, a frantic whirlwind of doubt and dread. Had he truly witnessed that fleeting movement, that subtle shift in the fabric? Or was it merely a phantom conjured by his frayed nerves, a cruel trick of the light? Then, the curtain moved again. This time, there was no room for doubt. The fabric rippled with unnatural fluidity, as if an unseen hand, cold and spectral, had reached out to pull it back, only to recoil at the last moment, as if hesitating to reveal the horrors lurking within. A wave of icy dread washed over him, his pulse thundering in his ears, a frantic drumbeat against the silence. His hands trembled violently, the knuckles wide as he clenched them into fists, desperately trying to anchor himself in reality. "Stop it," Alex whispered, his voice a mere tremor against the oppressive stillness. But deep down, a chilling certainty settled in his bones, a primal fear that transcended logic. He knew he wasn't imagining it. The curtain shifted once more, a slow, deliberate movement that sent shivers down his spine. And for a fleeting, terrifying moment, he saw Ida glimpse, a fleeting apparition, a face. The face was a mask of deathly pallor, almost translucent, like a ghost trapped behind the glass. The eyes, hollow and sunken, were dark voids that seemed to pierce through the window, through his skin, through his very soul, dissecting his fear. The mouth was twisted into a faint, unnatural smile, a rictus grin that stretched unnaturally across the pale skin, a chilling mockery of joy. Alex stumbled back, his breath coming in short, ragged gasps, his legs weak and trembling. He gripped the windowsill, his knuckles white, desperately trying to keep himself from collapsing. The curtain fell still, the house returning to its eerie, lifeless state, a silent sentinel guarding its dark secrets. But the feeling of being watched didn't dissipate. If anything, it intensified, growing more oppressive, as if the house itself had become a malevolent entity, its unseen eyes boring into his soul. Alex turned away, his back to the window, the image of that ghastly face seared into his mind. He tried to steady his breathing, but his hands were shaking so violently he could barely hold his phone. The digital clock read 7:30 a.m., but it felt like an eternity had passed, like the day had already stretched into an endless, nightmarish abyss. He needed to escape. He needed to get out of this house, this neighborhood, this suffocating atmosphere of dread. Alex grabbed his keys, his hands shaking so badly he could barely hold them, and headed for the door, desperate to flee the oppressive stillness. The sunlight outside, once a symbol of hope, now felt blinding, harsh, exposing his vulnerability. The air was cool and crisp, but it did little to calm the frantic pounding of his heart. He glanced across the street at the neighbor's house, half expecting to see him standing in the window, his ghostly face pressed against the glass. But the curtains were still drawn. The house is silent and still as a tomb. Alex told himself to keep walking, to get in his car and leave, to put as much distance as possible between himself and that house. But something stopped him. A sound. It was faint, barely audible over the rustling of the leaves, yet it cut through the silence like a razor, sending a shiver of icy dread down his spine. Tap, tap, tap. It was coming from the neighbor's house. Alex froze, his heart pounding against his ribs. The sound was rhythmic, deliberate, precise, like someone tapping their fingernails against the glass, a morbid metronome counting down to some unseen horror. Tap, tap, tap. He scanned the windows, searching for the source of the sound, but they were all dark and lifeless, reflecting only his own terrified gaze. The tapping continued, steady and unrelenting, echoing in the stillness of the morning, a chilling symphony of unseen horrors. And then it stopped. The silence that followed was even more terrifying. It was heavy, oppressive, a suffocating blanket that pressed against his skin, as if the world itself was holding its breath, waiting for the inevitable horror to unfold. Alex took a step back, his eyes locked on the house, his mind reeling. The shadows seemed to writhe and pulse, twisting into fleeting, grotesque shapes that vanished as soon as he tried to focus on them, like dark, living entities lurking just beyond the veil of perception. And then, he saw it again. The curtain in the living room shifted, just slightly, a subtle, deliberate movement, as if someone or something was peeking out, watching his every move. Alex turned and ran. He didn't stop until he was in his car, the doors locked, the engine roaring to life. His hands were trembling violently as he gripped the steering wheel, his breath coming in short, shallow gasps, a desperate struggle against the suffocating dread. He glanced in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see him standing in the street, his ghostly figure silhouetted against the morning light, but it was empty. The neighborhood was quiet, the houses bathed in the soft glow of the sun, a deceptive illusion of normalcy. But the feeling of being watched didn't dissipate. It clung to him like a second skin, a chilling certainty that he was being followed, hunted. Alex backed out of the driveway and sped away, his eyes darting to the rearview mirror every few seconds, searching for any sign of pursuit. The neighbor's house shrank in the distance, but the unease lingered, a heavy weight pressing down on his chest, a chilling premonition of impending doom. Even as he turned onto the main road, leaving the cul-de-sac behind. He couldn't shake the feeling that he was still being watched, that his unseen eyes were boring into his soul, dissecting his fear. Somehow, Alex knew this wasn't over, not even close. This was just the beginning of a nightmare that was only just beginning to unfold. The morning light filtered through the curtains like a sickly pallor, cast long, distorted shadows that writhed on the walls as if even the sun recoiled from this place. Alex sat at the kitchen table, staring at the cup of coffee in front of him. The steam curled upward like a phantom, twisting and distorting in the still air. His hands trembled, the memory of the face wrong, an alien clinging to him like a second skin. It wasn't just a face, it was a violation, a twisted mockery of humanity. The hollow, unblinking eyes and the unnaturally wide smile were burned into his mind, a chilling testament to something utterly other. He glanced at the window above the sink, expecting to see the neighbor or worse, something else watching him. The thought made his stomach churn, a wave of icy dread washing over him. Even with the lock secured, he felt exposed, vulnerable, as though unseen eyes were dissecting his every move. The house was a tomb. The silence was heavy, oppressive, amplifying every creak of the floorboards into a morbid symphony of dread. It wasn't just quiet. It was a listening silence, as if the very walls were holding their breath, waiting. Alex picked up his phone, desperate for a distraction, a lifeline to normalcy. But there was nothing. No calls, no texts, no escape. The digital void mirrored the emptiness inside him. Who could he call? Who would believe him? Was he losing his grip on reality? The thought of facing another day in this house, under the neighbor's unseen gaze, filled him with a primal terror that threatened to consume him. He forced himself to move, a puppet on strings, going through the motions of a life that felt increasingly distant. He brushed his teeth, dressed, a hollow imitation of normalcy. The unease was a weight pressing down on his chest, threatening to crush him, a suffocating shroud that clung to his skin. In the bathroom mirror, his reflection was a stranger. Bloodshot eyes, dark circles, pale, clammy skin, a ghost haunting its own body. "You're fine," Alex whispered, but the words were hollow, a desperate lie whispered to a terrified captive. The neighbor's face flashed in his mind, a chilling reminder of the presence that lurked just beyond the veil of perception. He splashed cold water on his face, a futile attempt to wash away the dread, to cleanse himself of the unseen eyes that seemed to bore into his soul. The water dripped, pooling in the sink, reflecting his haunted eyes, mirroring the abyss that had opened within him. And then he saw it. The figurine. It was sitting on the counter, its jagged smile wider than before, its hollow eyes staring directly at him. Alex froze, his breath catching in his throat, a strangled gasp against the suffocating silence. He hadn't brought it here. He was sure of it. He had left it in the bedroom, or had he? The figurine seemed to radiate a malevolent energy, an unseen force that pressed against his chest, making it hard to breathe. He reached out, his hand trembling, and picked it up. The wood was cold, unnaturally so, and slick, with a faint, oily residue. As he held it, a wave of nausea washed over him, and whispers filled his mind. They weren't words, but fragments of thoughts, alien and invasive, like worms wriggling in his brain, twisting his sanity into nightmarish knots. "Let us in," the whispers said, their voices a chilling chorus, echoing in the hollow chambers of his mind. Alex dropped the figurine, the dull thud against the counter, a stark counterpoint to the frantic pounding of his heart. The whispers ceased abruptly, leaving behind a silence more terrifying than any sound. He backed away, his hands trembling, his mind racing. Destroying it might make things worse. What if it was the only thing keeping whatever this was at bay? What if it was a fragile barrier against the encroaching darkness? The hours dragged on, each minute an eternity, a slow, agonizing descent into madness. The house was a prison, its walls unseen eyes, its very structure a weapon against his sanity. As the day turned to evening, the paranoia intensified. The shadows in the house seemed darker, deeper, as if they were alive, stretching and twisting into grotesque shapes that danced on the walls. Every creak of the floorboards, every groan of the house, felt like a deliberate intrusion, a reminder that Alex was no longer alone. He tried to distract himself by watching television, but the flickering images only heightened his anxiety. The distorted faces on the screen seemed to mock him, their shifting expressions mirroring the chaos within his mind. He turned it off, plunging the room into silence, and then he heard it. A faint tapping sound came from the direction of the window. Tap, tap, tap. Alex froze, his breath catching in his throat. The sound was soft at first, almost hesitant, like fingernails lightly rapping against the glass. Tap, tap, tap. Each tap was deliberate, precise, a chilling echo in the oppressive silence. He turned his head slowly, his eyes locking onto the curtains. The faint outline of the window behind them was illuminated by the pale light of the street lamp outside, a gateway to unseen horrors. "Who's there?" Alex whispered, his voice trembling, a desperate plea against the encroaching darkness. The tapping stopped abruptly, leaving behind a deafening stillness. For a moment, Alex allowed himself to believe it was over, that it had been nothing more than a trick of his imagination. But then, the tapping started again, faster this time, more insistent, a frantic pulse against the silence. Tap, 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 tap. Alex's heart pounded in his chest, a frantic drumbeat against the stillness. He stood up slowly, his legs trembling beneath him, his body a taut wire of fear. His eyes were locked on the curtains, and a cold sweat broke out on the back of his neck. The tapping stopped again, and for a moment, there was silence. Then, the curtains moved. It was subtle at first, just a faint ripple, a ghost of movement, as if someone had brushed against the fabric. But then, the movement became more pronounced, the curtains swaying as if caught in an invisible breeze. Alex took a step back, his hands clenched into fists at his sides, his knuckles white with terror. His eyes were glued to the curtains, and he felt a cold knot of dread forming in the pit of his stomach. "Who's there?" he demanded, his voice cracking, a desperate attempt to assert control over the situation. The curtains parted slightly, just enough for Alex to see the window behind them. And that's when he saw it. A face, pale and gaunt, with hollow, sunken eyes that seemed to glow faintly in the dim light, like embers in a dying fire. The mouth was twisted into a wide, unnatural smile, a rictus grin that stretched unnaturally across the pale skin, a chilling mockery of joy. Alex stumbled backward, a scream caught in his throat, a silent cry of terror against the horror that unfolded before him. The face didn't move, didn't blink. It just stared at him, unblinking and unrelenting, its gaze a chilling intrusion into his soul. The curtains fell back into place, and the face disappeared. But the feeling of being watched didn't dissipate. If anything, it grew stronger, more oppressive, as if the house itself had become a malevolent entity, its unseen eyes boring into Alex's soul. He turned and ran, his feet pounding against the floor as he fled to his bedroom. Slamming the door shut, he locked it and pressed his back against it, his chest heaving, his breath coming in short, ragged gasps. The silence that followed was suffocating, a heavy, oppressive weight that pressed against his skin. Alex grabbed his phone, his hand shaking so violently he could barely press the buttons, and dialed 911. The line rang once, twice, 3 times, and then it went dead. The silence on the other end of the line wasn't just a technical glitch. It was a chilling confirmation that he was cut off, isolated, at the mercy of whatever lurked outside. A new sound broke the silence, a faint scratching, coming from the other side of the door. The scratching was slow and deliberate, a dry, rasping sound that echoed through the room like claws dragging across wood. Each stroke was a chilling reminder of the unseen presence on the other side of the door. "Alex," a voice rasped, low and distorted, a chilling mockery of human speech. "Let me in." The scratching at the door intensified, a dry, rasping sound that echoed through the hallway like claws dragging across bone. It wasn't just a sound, it was a physical sensation, a vibration that resonated deep within Alex's bones, sending shivers of icy dread down his spine. His breath came in short, shallow gasps, and he pressed his back harder against the door, as if that fragile barrier could somehow keep the unseen horror at bay. "Alex," the voice rasped again, a distorted echo of his own, a chilling whisper that seemed to slither through the cracks in the door. "Alex, open the door. I just want to talk." The words, once familiar, now held a sinister undertone, a chilling invitation from the abyss. Alex shook his head, tears streaming down his face, a silent cry of terror against the encroaching darkness. "Go away," he screamed, his voice cracking, a desperate plea against the unseen horror that sought to consume him. The scratching stopped, and for a moment, There was silence, a suffocating void that amplified the dread that coiled in his gut. Then, the doorknob began to rattle, a slow, deliberate movement that sent shivers of icy dread down his spine. Alex scrambled to his feet, his hands gripping the knob, his knuckles white with terror, desperately trying to keep it from turning, to maintain the fragile barrier between himself and the unseen horror. His heart was pounding so hard he thought it might burst, each frantic beat a desperate plea for escape. "You can't hide from me, Alex," the voice said, muffled but clear, a chilling whisper that seemed to emanate from the very walls themselves. "I see you. I've always seen you." The laughter that followed was low and guttural, a hollow, echoing sound devoid of joy, a chilling symphony of madness that echoed through the hallway, a sound that seemed to emanate from the very depths of his nightmares. Alex didn't know what to do, trapped in a nightmare with no escape. His phone was useless, a cold, dead object in his trembling hand, a chilling reminder of his isolation. He was trapped in his own house, a prisoner in his own sanctuary, the walls closing in, the air growing heavier with each passing second, a suffocating shroud that threatened to consume him. And then, the rattling stopped, leaving behind a deafening silence that was even more terrifying than the sound itself, a suffocating void that amplified the dread that coiled in his gut. Alex pressed his ear to the door, straining to hear any sound, any indication of the neighbor's presence, but there was nothing, just the oppressive silence that seemed to pulse with dark intent. No footsteps, no breathing, nothing. Just the chilling certainty that he was no longer alone, that he was being hunted, stalked by a presence that defied comprehension. He waited for what felt like hours, his body tense and trembling, every nerve screaming in protest. Finally, he worked up the courage to unlock the door and peek outside, his hand shaking so violently he could barely grip the doorknob. The hallway was empty, a silent stage for unseen horrors, a chilling testament to the unseen eyes that watched his every move. But the feeling of being watched was stronger than ever, a chilling certainty that he was no longer alone. Alex crept down the hallway, his footsteps silent on the carpet, his body tense and trembling. The house was dark, the only light coming from the faint glow of the streetlights outside, casting long, distorted shadows that danced on the walls. He checked every room, his heart racing with every creak of the floorboards, each sound a chilling reminder of his vulnerability. The living room, the kitchen, the bathroom, everything was exactly as he had left it, yet imbued with an unsettling stillness, a chilling premonition of horrors yet to unfold. But no matter how much he searched, he couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't alone, that unseen eyes were watching his every move, dissecting his fear. He made his way to the front door, his hands trembling as he reached for the lock, a desperate attempt to escape the suffocating atmosphere of dread that permeated every corner of his house. He needed to get out, to get as far away as possible, to escape the unseen horror that sought to consume him. But as he unlocked the door and pulled it open, he froze, his blood turning to ice in his veins. The neighbor was standing on the porch. His pale face was illuminated by the dim light of the street lamp, a ghostly figure silhouetted against the darkness. His eyes were hollow and unblinking, dark voids that seemed to pierce through Alex's soul, and his mouth was twisted into that same unnatural smile, a rictus grin that stretched unnaturally across his pale skin, a chilling mockery of joy. "Going somewhere?" the neighbor asked, his voice low and mocking, a guttural growl that seemed to emanate from the very depths of Alex's nightmares. Alex stumbled backward, his heart racing, a frantic drumbeat against the silence. "Stay away from me," he shouted, his voice trembling, a desperate plea against the encroaching darkness. The neighbor stepped forward, his movements slow and deliberate, a chilling predator stalking its prey. "You've been watching me, Alex," he said, his tone calm, almost soothing, a chilling invitation from the abyss. "Just as I've been watching you." "I don't know what you're talking about," Alex stammered, his back hitting the wall, trapped in a nightmare with no escape. The neighbor's smile widened, and he tilted his head to the side, his eyes gleaming with something dark and malevolent, a chilling reflection of the abyss that lurked within his soul. "Lying doesn't suit you," he said, his voice a chilling whisper that seemed to slither through the cracks in Alex's sanity. Alex grabbed the nearest objective lampstand, held it in front of him like a weapon, a desperate attempt to ward off the unseen horror. "Stay back," he warned, his voice shaking, a fragile defense against the encroaching darkness. The neighbor stopped, his smile never faltering, a chilling mask of inhumanity. "You can't fight this," he said, his voice soft and almost pitying, a chilling declaration of the inevitable. "It's already begun." "What are you talking about?" Alex demanded, his grip tightening on the lamp, his knuckles white with terror. The neighbor didn't answer. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out something small and dark. He held it up, and Alex's stomach dropped, a chilling premonition of horrors yet to unfold. It was the figurine, the same wooden figurine Alex had found on his porch, a chilling symbol of the unseen horror that had invaded his life. "You shouldn't have taken it," the neighbor said, his tone almost scolding, a chilling reprimand from the abyss. "It wasn't meant for you." "I don't understand," Alex said, his voice barely above a whisper, a chilling echo in the oppressive silence. The neighbor stepped closer, holding the figurine out to him, a chilling invitation from the abyss. "Take it," he said. Alex shook his head, his hands trembling, a desperate refusal against the encroaching darkness. "Number. Take it," the neighbor repeated, his voice firmer this time, a chilling command that seemed to resonate through the very walls of the house. The air around Alex seemed to grow colder, a chilling premonition of horrors yet to unfold, and he felt a pressure in his chest, as if the house itself were closing in on him, suffocating him with its dark intent. "Take it," the neighbor said again, his voice echoing in Alex's ears, a chilling symphony of madness. Alex reached out, his hand trembling, and took the figurine from him, a chilling acceptance of the inevitable. The moment his fingers touched the wood, a wave of nausea washed over him, and whispers filled his mind. "Let us in," they said, their voices a chilling chorus, echoing in the hollow chambers of Alex's mind. He dropped the figurine, the dull thud against the floor, a stark counterpoint to the frantic pounding of his heart. The whispers ceased abruptly, leaving behind a silence more terrifying than any sound. Alex didn't sleep. He couldn't. Every time he closed his eyes, the neighbor's facial mask of inhumanity, a grotesque parody of human expression, burned into his mind. The hollow, unblinking eyes bored into his soul, dissecting his fear. He sat on the couch, the kitchen knife, a cold, useless comfort in his trembling hands. The silence was a suffocating blanket, amplifying every creak of the floorboards, every groan of the walls, into a morbid symphony of dread. The shadows writhed and pulsed, like living entities, their forms shifting and contorting in the dim light. At some point, Alex must have dozed off, a fleeting moment of unconsciousness in the face of unimaginable terror, only to jolt awake, the knife clattering to the floor. He glanced at the clock. It was just past 4 a.m. For the first time all night, he felt a small flicker of relief. The darkness was retreating, and with it, the suffocating sense of dread. But then, he heard it, a faint tapping sound coming from the direction of the window. Tap, tap, tap. His body went rigid, every muscle tensing. The sound echoed through the room, a chilling declaration of the neighbor's presence. It was soft at first, almost hesitant, like fingernails lightly rapping against the glass. Tap, tap, tap. The sound was steady, deliberate, as if the neighbor was waiting for him to respond, testing his resolve. "Who's there?" Alex called out, his voice trembling, a desperate plea against the encroaching darkness. The tapping stopped abruptly, leaving behind a deafening stillness. But then, it started again faster this time, more insistent. Tap, 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 tap. The frantic rhythm hammered against the silence. Alex stood up slowly, his legs trembling beneath him. His eyes were locked on the curtains, and he felt a cold sweat break out on the back of his neck. The tapping stopped again, and for a moment, there was silence. Then, the curtains moved. It was subtle at first, just a faint ripple, a ghost of movement. But then, the movement became more pronounced, the curtains swaying as if caught in an invisible breeze. Alex took a step back, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. His eyes were glued to the curtains, and he felt a cold knot of dread forming in the pit of his stomach. "Who's there?" he whispered, his voice barely audible. The curtains parted slightly, just enough for Alex to see the window behind them, and that's when he saw it. A face, pale and gaunt, with hollow, sunken eyes that seemed to glow faintly in the dim light. The mouth was twisted into a wide, unnatural smile. Alex stumbled backward, a scream caught in his throat. The face didn't move, didn't blink. It just stared at him, unblinking and unrelenting. The knife slipped from his hands and hit the floor with a dull thud. His legs felt like jelly, and he collapsed onto the couch, his chest heaving. The face remained at the window, its eyes locked on his. And then it began to move. The face disappeared from view, and Alex heard the faint sound of footsteps outside, slow and deliberate. They circled the house, the sound growing louder and closer with each step. He scrambled to his feet, his hands shaking as he grabbed the knife again. The footsteps stopped, and for a moment, there was silence. Then, the front door rattled. The front door rattled violently, a metallic shriek that echoed through the house. Alex's breath caught in his throat, and he stumbled backward, clutching the knife. "Alex," the voice rasped, low and guttural, devoid of warmth. "Let me in." The doorknob twisted, the lock holding firm, but Alex could hear the strain as the neighbor pushed against it. He turned and ran toward the living room, his bare feet skidding on the hardwood floor. He yanked the window open, the cool morning air rushing in and hitting his face like a slap. The ground was damp with dew, and the chill seeped into his skin. Behind him, the door rattled again, harder this time. "Alex," the neighbor called, his voice louder now. "You can't run from me." Alex ran. The neighborhood was eerily quiet, the houses dark and lifeless. The only sounds were the pounding of his feet against the pavement and the ragged gasps of his breath. He didn't know where he was going, just away. He glanced over his shoulder. The neighbor was there, a shadowy figure silhouetted against the fading light. Standing at the edge of the street, he was a spectral figure, his pale face illuminated by the faint glow of the streetlights. He wasn't running, wasn't even walking. He just stood there, watching Alex with an unnerving stillness. Alex turned back and kept running, his legs burning, his lungs screaming for air. He turned a corner and spotted a house with its porch light on. He reached the door and banged on it with all his strength. "Help!" he screamed, his voice hoarse. "Please, someone help me!" But there was no answer, only the chilling silence that seemed to mock his desperation. Behind him, he heard the sound of footsteps. He turned, his heart pounding in his chest. The neighbor was there, standing at the edge of the yard, his twisted smile wider than ever. Alex turned and ran again, his legs trembling beneath him. He didn't know where he was going, just away, into the oblivion of the night. He turned another corner and spotted the woods at the edge of the neighborhood, a dark, ominous expanse that loomed like a gaping maw. He sprinted toward the trees, the branches clawing at his skin as he pushed his way through the underbrush. The footsteps followed him into the woods, the sound growing louder, closer. Alex tripped over a root and fell to the ground. He scrambled to his feet and turned, his back pressed against a tree. His eyes darted around the woods, searching for any sign of the neighbor. The footsteps stopped. The silence was deafening. "Alex," the neighbor's voice called, echoing through the trees. "You can't hide from me." The shadows seemed to shift around him, the darkness growing thicker, more oppressive. And then the neighbor stepped out from behind a tree, his pale face illuminated by the faint light filtering through the canopy. Alex raised the knife, his hands shaking. "Stay back," he warned. The neighbor tilted his head, his smile widening. "You can't fight this," he said. Alex lunged at him, the knife slashing through the air, but the neighbor moved with an unnatural swiftness. His hand shot out, grabbing Alex's wrist with a grip like iron. The knife fell from his hand, clattering against the forest floor. "You can't escape," the neighbor said, his voice low and menacing. "You belong to me now." With a sudden burst of adrenaline-fueled desperation, Alex wrenched his arm free and scrambled to his feet. He didn't look back as he ran, the sound of the neighbor's laughter echoing behind him. He didn't stop until he burst out of the trees and into the open field beyond. The field stretched out before Alex, bathed in the soft, golden light of the rising sun. The warmth of the morning should have been comforting, a symbol of hope and safety, but it wasn't. The light felt cold and distant, a cruel mockery of relief. Alex collapsed onto the damp grass, his chest heaving, his breath coming in short, ragged gasps. His legs trembled beneath him, his body aching from the relentless chase. He glanced back at the woods, a dark, ominous expanse that loomed like a gaping maw. The neighbor was gone, vanished into the shadows, a chilling testament to his unseen power. But Alex knew he wasn't finished with him. Not yet. The unease lingered, a constant weight pressing down on Alex's chest, a suffocating shroud that clung to his skin. He sat up slowly, his eyes scanning the tree line, searching for any sign of the neighbor's return. The shadows seemed to shift and writhe like living entities, their forms contorting into grotesque shapes that danced on the edges of his vision. But there was no sign of him. No pale face, no twisted smile, no chilling apparition against the morning light. Still, the feeling of being watched persisted, a chilling certainty that Alex was no longer alone. He needed to get help, to find someone who could see the horror that stalked him, to break free from the unseen chains that bound him to this nightmare. Alex stumbled to his feet, his legs weak and unsteady, and began walking toward the road in the distance. The field was vast and empty, a desolate landscape devoid of life. The only sound was the rustling of the grass and the gentle breeze, a morbid lullaby in the face of terror. His mind raced as he tried to make sense of what had happened, to unravel the mystery that had consumed his life. Who or what was the neighbor? How had he found Alex so easily, no matter where he went? And what did he mean when he said Alex had let him in? The figurine. The thought hit Alex like a punch to the gut, a chilling revelation that sent shivers of icy dread down his spine. It had all started with that figurine. The moment he found it on his porch, everything changed. The world had shifted on its axis, and he had been plunged into a nightmare with no escape. The road was deserted, stretching endlessly in both directions, a desolate path into the unknown. Alex turned left, heading toward the faint outline of a house in the distance, a beacon of false hope in the encroaching darkness. His feet dragged against the pavement, his body screaming for rest, his muscles aching with exhaustion. But he couldn't stop. Not now. Not when the unseen horror was still lurking in the shadows, waiting for him to make a mistake. As Alex walked, the shadows seemed to stretch and twist unnaturally, creeping closer with every step. He glanced over his shoulder, his heart pounding, a frantic drumbeat against the silence. The road behind him was empty, but the unease grew stronger, gnawing at the edges of his mind. When he finally reached the house, he hesitated, his hand trembling as he approached the door. It was small and unassuming, with peeling paint and a sagging porch. The curtains were drawn, and there was no sign of life inside. Alex climbed the steps, each creak of the wood beneath his feet sending a shiver down his spine. He raised his hand to knock, but before he could, the door swung open, revealing the darkness within. An elderly woman stood in the doorway, her face lined with age and worry. Her eyes widened when she saw Alex, and she stepped back, clutching the doorframe for support. "You shouldn't be here," she said, her voice trembling, a chilling whisper that seemed to emanate from the very depths of her fear. "Please," Alex begged, his voice hoarse, a raw, primal plea for salvation. "I need help. He's after me." Her expression darkened, the lines on her face deepening into a mask of ancient dread. "You brought him here," she said, her tone accusatory, a chilling whisper that sent a wave of icy dread through Alex. "What are you talking about?" Alex stammered, his voice barely a tremor against the oppressive silence. The woman stepped aside, her movement slow and deliberate, like a puppet on unseen strings, motioning for Alex to come in. "Hurry," she said, her voice urgent, a chilling premonition of horrors yet to unfold. "Before it's too late." Inside the house, darkness reigned like a suffocating shroud. The narrow corridor, lit by a solitary, flickering bulb, revealed peeling wallpaper, dusty surfaces, and a lingering aroma of damp decay that clung to every corner. In the depths of that oppressive gloom, an elderly woman, her face etched with the sorrow of countless secrets and stained by years of hidden suffering, ushered Alex into a parlor that felt more like a mausoleum than a living room. They settled into mismatched, time-worn chairs that creaked under the weight of unspoken history. The silence between them vibrated with tension as shadows shifted along the walls, twisting into grotesque shapes that seemed almost sentient. The woman's eyes, clouded yet piercing, darted anxiously toward the darkened glass of a window, as if expecting the very specter of the neighbor to materialize at any given moment. Her voice emerged low and brittle, sounding as though it had borne witness to terrible tragedies over many lifetimes. "You've seen him, haven't you?" she whispered, the syllables laced with a mix of dread and resigned inevitability. Alex's heart hammered as he gave a slow, trembling nod. His voice was barely more than a rasp. "Who is he? What does he want from me?" The question trembled in the air, laden with both desperation and a foreboding sense of fate. The old woman exhaled a long, sorrowful sigh, each breath weighted with the burden of unspeakable memories. "He's not a man anymore," she murmured, her tone steeped in an otherworldly chill. "He's something, transformed by a darkness that you, too, have unwittingly invited into your world." Her words slithered through the silence like venom, each syllable echoing the terror of her haunted past. Alex's throat closed as a shudder ran through him, colder than the winter's bite. What do you mean?" he managed to ask, his voice thick with a mix of incredulity and fear. For a long moment, she regarded him with eyes that seemed to reflect the abyss. The air between them grew perilously still, broken only by the soft sound of a distant clock ticking a morose metronome to despair. "Long ago," she began, her voice dipping into a cadence that felt both timeless and cursed. "He was one of USA neighbor, a friend, perhaps even a guardian, but something in him broke. He betrayed the natural order, and in that breaking, the darkness remade him." Her gaze drifted to the window, as if the memory of that transformation was too vivid to contain. "The figurine you discovered, it is no mere trinket. It is a sigil, a marker etched by fate and sealed by corrupted souls. When you touched it, you bore his mark, binding you to a destiny steeped in the unknowable void." Alex's stomach churned violently at her words. He pressed his hands against his face, as if to physically block the horror from sinking in. "Claim me for what?" he demanded, voice cracking, as though he could not believe that he was the target of such an ancient curse. Her eyes, glistening with unshed tears and unspoken agony, locked onto his with an intensity that pierced the fragile barrier of his hope. "Claim you for oblivion," she intoned, each word deliberate and echoing in the uneasy silence of the room. "Once marked, he will haunt you relentlessly through every shadow, every whisper of the wind, every shudder of your heart. You will find no respite, for his presence will gnaw at your sanity until all that remains is a hollow echo of the man you once were." The air itself seemed to tighten, and Alex found it increasingly hard to breathe, as if the very atmosphere conspired to smother him with dread. The old woman's gaze softened momentarily, her features contorting with both pity and resolve. "I once believed there was a way," she continued, her voice dropping to a murmur that was strangely hypnotic. "A forbidden hope that one might sever this unholy bond. But the truth is uglier still. The curse is immutable, relentless pursuit that only deepens with every desperate attempt to flee." Alex's pulse thundered in his ears as he leaned forward, his eyes wide with a mixture of terror and pleading urgency. "There has to be a way to stop him," he declared, his voice quivering as if each word required the strength of a battle cry against an unseen adversary. The old woman's lips curled into a bitter, knowing smile, one that spoke of a lifetime spent in quiet despair. "Run, if you must," she said softly, the words almost lost in the oppressive gloom. "But know this, no matter how far your feet carry you, the shadow will follow. You invited this horror into your life, and now it festers within the darkness of your soul. In every mirror, in every shadowed corner, it lingers, silent, insidious, waiting for the moment when your resolve crumbles." A sudden, jarring bang reverberated through the house, a sound so violent it shattered the fragile stillness, as if a door in the labyrinth of his fate had been violently flung open. The old woman's eyes widened in abject terror, and a tremor rolled visibly through her weathered frame. "It's here," she breathed, her voice barely audible, laden with dread that reached into the very marrow of the room. At that moment, the temperature seemed to plummet further, and the once still shadows erupted in a macabre dance on the walls, a writhing, undulating mass that hinted at unspeakable horrors beyond mortal comprehension. The old woman clutched at the arms of her chair, as if bracing against an oncoming storm of nightmares. "Go," she commanded with a fervor that brooked no argument. "Escape through the back door, now before it claims what little remains of you." Her voice, layered with cryptic urgency and haunting finality, filled the suffocating silence as Alex's mind teetered on the brink of overwhelming terror. In that excruciating pause, amid the cacophony of whispered regrets and the palpable pulse of fear, the room seemed to hold its breath, suspended between an ancient curse and the desperate hope of escape. And then, as if drawn by an unseen hand, the walls themselves began to murmur a soft, indecipherable chant, like voices carried on a cold wind from a time long lost. The words, fragmented and maddening, spiraled into the air, intertwining with the echoes of the old woman's final warning. "They come from the void, and in the void we are all destined to vanish. Beware the silence that follows, for in its stillness lies the reckoning." Alex's heart pounded in symphony with the tumultuous dark, each beat a reminder of the inevitable pursuit that loomed just beyond the threshold of mortal perception. He stared at the woman, whose eyes now shone with a resigned terror, and in that fleeting moment, Something unspoken passed between Thima's silent confession of sins, long buried, and the dire knowledge that the nightmare was far from over. The old woman's trembling hand reached for a small, rusted crucifix on the table beside her. She clutched it tightly, her knuckles white, as if the fragile object could somehow ward off the encroaching darkness. Her lips moved silently, mouthing a prayer that Alex couldn't hear, her eyes darting toward the shadows that now seemed to pulse and writhe with malevolent intent. "Go," she whispered again, her voice breaking, her gaze fixed on something just beyond Alex's shoulder. "He's already inside." Alex froze, his blood running cold. The words hit him like a physical blow, and for a moment, he couldn't move, couldn't breathe. Slowly, he turned his head, his eyes scanning the dimly lit room. The shadows stretched unnaturally long, twisting and contorting into grotesque shapes that seemed to mock his fear. The air grew heavier, colder, pressing against his chest like an invisible weight. And then he saw it. In the far corner of the room, where the light from the flickering bulb barely reached, a figure stood motionless. It was the neighbor. His pale, gaunt face was partially obscured by the darkness, but his hollow, unblinking eyes glowed faintly, like embers in a dying fire. His twisted smile stretched impossibly wide, a grotesque parody of human expression. Alex stumbled backward, his breath coming in short, ragged gasps. How did you get in here?" he stammered, his voice trembling, barely audible over the pounding of his heart. The neighbor didn't answer. He tilted his head slightly, his movements slow and deliberate, like a predator studying its prey. His smile widened, revealing teeth that were too sharp, too jagged, as if they had been carved from bone. "You let me in," he said, his voice low and distorted, a chilling echo that seemed to reverberate through the very walls of the house. Alex's legs felt like jelly, his body trembling uncontrollably. "No," he whispered, shaking his head. I didn't let you in." The neighbor took a step forward, his movements unnaturally fluid, as if he were gliding rather than walking. The shadows around him seemed to ripple and shift, drawn to him like moths to a flame. "Oh, but you did," he said, his tone almost playful, yet dripping with malice. "The moment you touched the figurine, you opened the door. You invited me into your life, into your mind." Alex's back hit the wall, and he realized with a sinking dread that there was nowhere left to run. The old woman stood frozen, her eyes wide with terror, the crucifix trembling in her hand. "Stay back," she shouted, her voice cracking, a desperate command that carried no weight against the malevolent force before her. The neighbor's gaze shifted to her, his smile never faltering. "You've been hiding from me for so long," he said, his voice soft, almost tender. "Did you really think you could escape forever?" The old woman's lips quivered, but she stood her ground, raising the crucifix higher. "You don't belong here," she said, her voice trembling but resolute. "You're an abomination, a stain on this world." The neighbor chuckled, a low, guttural sound that sent shivers down Alex's spine. "And yet, here I am," he said, spreading his arms wide, as if to embrace the darkness that surrounded him. "You can't fight what's already inside you." The shadow surged forward, engulfing the old woman in an instant. Her scream was raw and primal, a sound that echoed through the house and pierced Alex's soul. The crucifix fell from her hand, clattering to the floor as the darkness consumed her, leaving nothing behind but an empty chair and the faint scent of decay. Alex's knees buckled, and he collapsed to the floor, his body trembling violently. The neighbor turned his attention back to him, his glowing eyes locking onto Alex's with an intensity that felt like a physical force. "You see now, don't you?" he said, his voice soft, almost soothing. "There's no escape, you belong to me." "No," Alex whispered, his voice barely audible. "This isn't real. This can't be real." The neighbor crouched down in front of him, his face inches from Alex's. The air around him was icy cold, and Alex could feel the oppressive weight of his presence pressing down on him, suffocating him. "Oh, it's very real," the neighbor said, his voice a chilling whisper. "And it's only just beginning." Alex's vision blurred as tears streamed down his face. He wanted to scream, to fight, to do anything to break free from the nightmare that had consumed his life. But he was paralyzed, trapped in the suffocating grip of fear. The neighbor reached out, his long, bony fingers brushing against Alex's cheek. His touch was cold, like the chill of a grave, and Alex flinched, his body recoiling instinctively. "You've been running for so long," the neighbor said, his tone almost pitying. "But you can't run from what's inside you. "You can't run from me." The shadows around them began to close in, the room growing darker and darker until Alex could no longer see the walls, the floor, or even his own hands. The only thing he could see was the neighbor's face, glowing faintly in the darkness. His twisted smile, the last thing Alex saw before the world went black. The darkness was absolute. Alex felt as though he were suspended in a void, weightless and disoriented, with no sense of time or space. The air was thick and cold, pressing against his skin like a suffocating shroud. He tried to move, but his limbs felt heavy, as if they were bound by invisible chains. His breath came in shallow gasps, each one echoing unnaturally in the oppressive silence. And then, the whispers began. They were faint at first, barely audible, like the rustling of leaves in a distant wind. But they grew louder, more insistent, until they surrounded him. A cacophony of voices speaking in a language he couldn't understand. The words were sharp and guttural, each syllable cutting into his mind like shards of glass. He clamped his hands over his ears, but it did nothing to block out the sound. The voices were inside him, burrowing into his thoughts, twisting his memories into grotesque parodies of themselves. "Alex?" one voice hissed, rising above the others. It was low and distorted, dripping with malice. "You can't hide from us." "Who are you?" Alex shouted, his voice trembling, barely audible over the relentless whispers. "What do you want from me?" The voices fell silent, and for a moment, the void was eerily still. Then, the neighbor's voice emerged from the darkness, soft and mocking. "We want what you've already given," he said, his tone laced with cruel amusement. "Your fear, your soul." Alex's heart pounded in his chest, a frantic drumbeat against the suffocating silence. "I didn't give you anything," he cried, his voice cracking. "I didn't ask for this." The neighbor's laughter echoed through the void, a hollow, guttural sound that sent shivers down Alex's spine. "Oh, but you did," he said, his voice dripping with malice. "The moment you touched the figurine, you opened the door. You invited us in." The darkness around Alex began to shift, the shadows twisting and contorting into grotesque shapes. Faces emerged from the void-pale, hollow-eyed visages, with twisted smiles that mirrored the neighbors. They surrounded him, their unblinking eyes boring into his soul, dissecting his fear. Their mouths moved in unison, whispering words that Alex couldn't understand, but their intent was clear. They were claiming him. "No," Alex screamed, his voice raw and desperate. "This isn't real. This can't be real." The neighbor's face appeared before him, glowing faintly in the darkness. His smile was wider than ever, his eyes gleaming with malevolent delight. "Reality is what we make it," he said, his voice a chilling whisper. "And now, your reality belongs to us." The shadows surged forward, engulfing Alex in a suffocating wave of darkness. He felt their cold, clammy touch against his skin, their whispers filling his mind, drowning out his thoughts. He tried to fight, to push them away, but it was like trying to hold back the tide. The more he struggled, the tighter their grip became. "Let me go," he shouted, his voice muffled by the oppressive darkness. "Please, let me go." The neighbor's laughter echoed around him, a cruel, mocking sound that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "There is no escape," he said, his voice low and menacing. "You belong to us now." Alex's vision blurred as the darkness closed in, his body trembling with exhaustion and fear. He felt himself sinking, falling deeper into the void, the whispers growing louder, more insistent. His mind was unraveling, his thoughts splintering into fragments, each one consumed by the relentless tide of shadows. And then, just as he thought he would be swallowed completely, a faint light appeared in the distance. It was small and flickering, like the flame of a candle, but it pierced through the darkness, cutting through the shadows like a blade. The whispers faltered, their voices growing softer, more hesitant. Alex reached for the light, his hand trembling, his body straining against the weight of the darkness. The closer he got, the brighter the light became until it was blinding, a searing beacon of hope in the void. The shadows recoiled, their twisted forms writhing in agony as the light consumed them. The neighbor's voice rose above the chaos, a furious roar that shook the very fabric of the void. "You can't escape me," he bellowed, his voice filled with rage. "This isn't over." The neighbor's voice rose above the chaos, a furious roar that shook the very fabric of the void. "You can't escape me," he bellowed, his voice filled with rage. "This isn't over." The light enveloped Alex, and the darkness fell away, the whispers fading into silence. He felt a rush of air against his skin, the cold, suffocating weight lifting from his chest. When he opened his eyes, he was lying on the ground, the morning sun shining down on him. He was back in the field, the tall grass swaying gently in the breeze. The woods loomed in the distance, dark and foreboding, but the oppressive presence of the neighbor was gone. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, Alex could breathe. But the relief was short-lived. As he sat up, he noticed something in his hand. It was the figurine, its jagged smile and hollow eyes staring back at him. The wood was warm to the touch, pulsing faintly as if it were alive. Alex's heart sank as the realization hit him. The nightmare wasn't over. It had only just begun. Alex stared at the figurine in his hand, his breath catching in his throat. The warmth of the wood was unnatural, pulsing faintly like a heartbeat. Its jagged smile seemed wider now, its hollow eyes deeper, darker, as if they were staring straight into his soul. He wanted to throw it away, to hurl it into the distance and never look at it again, but his fingers wouldn't obey. They clung to the figurine, as if it were fused to his skin, an extension of his very being. The field around him was eerily quiet. The breeze that had once rustled the grass was gone, replaced by an oppressive stillness. The sun, which had shone brightly just moments ago, seemed dimmer now, its light muted and cold. Shadows stretched unnaturally long across the ground, twisting and writhing like living things. Alex's chest tightened as a familiar sensation crept over him, the feeling of being watched. He turned his head slowly, his eyes scanning the horizon. The woods loomed in the distance, dark and foreboding, but they were empty. The road behind him stretched endlessly, devoid of life. And then he saw it. Far across the field, standing at the edge of the tree line, was the neighbor. His pale, gaunt figure was unmistakable, his twisted smile visible even from this distance. He stood perfectly still, his hollow eyes locked on Alex, unblinking, unrelenting. The sight of him sent a wave of icy dread crashing over Alex, freezing him in place. "No," Alex whispered, shaking his head. "You're not real. You're not real." The neighbor tilted his head, his smile widening. Slowly, he raised one hand and pointed at Alex. The figurine in Alex's hand grew hotter, the pulsing more intense. He cried out in pain, trying to drop it, but his fingers wouldn't release their grip. The heat spread up his arm, searing his skin, and the whispers returned soft at first, but growing louder, more insistent. "Let us in," they hissed, their voices overlapping, a chilling chorus that filled his mind. "Let us in, Alex." Alex stumbled backward, his heart pounding, his mind racing. "No!" he screamed, his voice raw and desperate. "Leave me alone!" The neighbor began to move. He didn't walk, he glided, his feet never touching the ground, his movements unnaturally smooth and fluid. The distance between them closed impossibly fast, the neighbor's figure growing larger, more imposing with every passing second. Alex turned and ran. His legs burned as he sprinted across the field, the tall grass whipping against his skin. The whispers grew louder, more frantic, their voices echoing in his skull. The figurine in his hand felt like a living thing, its heat unbearable, its pulsing in perfect rhythm with his racing heart. "You can't run, Alex," the neighbor's voice called, low and mocking, carried on the wind. "You can't escape what's already inside you." Alex didn't look back. He couldn't. The fear was too great, the certainty that the neighbor was right behind him too overwhelming. He could feel the weight of his gaze, the cold, suffocating presence pressing down on him. The road came into view, a thin strip of asphalt cutting through the endless expanse of the field. Alex's lungs burned, his legs trembling with exhaustion, but he pushed himself forward, desperate to reach it. As he neared the road, the whispers reached a deafening crescendo, their voices overlapping in a chaotic symphony of madness. The figurine in his hand began to change, its jagged smile twisting, its hollow eyes glowing faintly with an unnatural light. And then, the ground beneath him shifted. Alex stumbled, his foot sinking into the earth as if it were quicksand. He tried to pull himself free, but the ground clung to him, pulling him down, inch by inch. The grass around him writhed like living tendrils, wrapping around his legs, his arms, dragging him deeper into the earth. "No!" he screamed, clawing at the ground, his fingers digging into the dirt. "Help me, somebody, please!" The neighbor appeared in front of him, his pale face looming above Alex like a specter of death. His smile was impossibly wide now, his hollow eyes glowing with a sickly yellow light. He crouched down, his face inches from Alex's, his cold breath washing over him. "You let me in," the neighbor said, his voice soft, almost tender. "And now, you're mine." The ground swallowed Alex's legs, pulling him deeper, the dirt cold and suffocating. He thrashed and screamed, but it was no use. The neighbor reached out, his long, bony fingers brushing against Alex's cheek. "Don't fight it," he whispered, his voice a chilling lullaby. "This is where you belong." The figurine in Alex's hand began to glow, its light blinding, its heat unbearable. The whispers reached a fever pitch, their voices screaming in unison. "Let us in! Let us in!" And then, everything stopped. The whispers fell silent. The ground beneath Alex stilled. The neighbor's smile faded, replaced by a look of confusion. The figurine shattered in Alex's hand, the pieces falling to the ground like shards of glass. A blinding light erupted from the fragments, engulfing the field, the road, the woods, everything. The neighbor let out a guttural scream, his body contorting, his form dissolving into the light. The shadows writhed and twisted, their forms disintegrating, consumed by the brilliance. Alex felt himself being pulled upward, away from the suffocating earth, away from the darkness. The light enveloped him, warm and comforting, washing away the fear, the pain, the despair. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, it was over. Alex opened his eyes. He was lying on the side of the road, the morning sun shining down on him. The field was empty, the woods silent. The figurine was gone, its presence erased as if it had never existed. But the unease lingered. As Alex sat up, his body trembling, he felt a familiar sensation, the feeling of being watched. He turned his head slowly, his eyes scanning the horizon. Far in the distance, at the edge of the woods, a figure stood motionless. It was the neighbor. His pale face was barely visible, his hollow eyes locked on Alex. And though the distance was great, Alex could see it clearly, the twisted smile, wider than ever. The nightmare wasn't over. It had only just begun.